Recently, we saw the release of the Minecraft 26.2 drop, otherwise known as Chaos Cubed. And it's 1,000 times better than the last drop. With that said, I've honestly been on a bit of a roller coaster of emotions with this update. Its initial announcement excited me since it looked so much better than the baby drop. Then it was really cool seeing people come up with new contraptions using the Sulfur Cube, until they didn't work in Java. After that minor disappointment though, Mojang then released a totally new feature that would have made this drop the most important drop Mojang has ever made. I use past tense for a reason, we'll get to that. And then, before this drop came out, Mojang showed off features for the brand new fall drop, and I'm sorry Chaos Cubed, but I'm way more excited for the stuff coming there. An autumn biome and wool stairs are probably both features I have had on my top 10 most wanted feature list ever since I started playing the game. So now that Chaos Cubed is out, I'm kind of excited for it, but I'm honestly just waiting for the stuff we get next drop. With all that said, this is still definitely one of the better drops in my opinion, even if my ranking today is gonna make it seem a lot smaller than it is. Oh yeah, we're ranking all the features from the worst to the best today. While this update on the surface added more than most of the other drops we've talked about, due to how I do my rankings, we're actually going to have less entries than normal on the list today. I only talk about features that are relevant to survival mode, and similar features get combined together into one spot. So sorry if you wanted to see how specifically the polished cinnabar slabs stacked up against sulfur walls, you're going to have to settle for how all of the cinnabar blocks do against all of the sulfur blocks. Since most of the new additions in this update are either sulfur or cinnabar building blocks, that does make the number of entries on this list seem a bit smaller. Don't worry though, I still talk about all the blocks in depth, and I tried to divide them up as best I can to make sure I cover every bit of detail I can about this drop. As always, this list will be judging the features based on how useful or fun I think they'll be in survival mode. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right in. Now this ranking is going to start a bit differently than my other drop rankings. If you watched my Tomodachi Life minigame ranking, you'll know that I had to start that video off with a limbo entry since I had no way of playing one of the minigames. We're going to have to do the exact same thing for this video, though for a slightly different reason. So our limbo entry is going to be 11, the friends list. This is a feature I genuinely never thought they would ever add to Java Edition. If you played Minecraft on Bedrock or the GOAT Legacy Console Edition, you would know that multiplayer is a million times easier to set up. While on Java Edition, you have to either pay for a realm or struggle to set up a server, on those other editions, you could just open up your single player worlds at any time and your friends could join over the internet. Sure, they wouldn't be able to play in that world while the host was offline, but this was a fantastic way to do simultaneous multiplayer. I know I spent a lot of my time using this feature to play with my friends on the PlayStation 3 edition. Not on the Wii U, none of my friends had that. This was great for both long-term worlds or just showing off quick builds you made in creative mode. Due to just how long Java has existed without this feature though, I kind of assumed it would never come despite how incredibly important it is. That's why it came as such a surprising shock to open the Minecraft changelog and see that this feature was finally added. You would now be able to friend other players with their usernames and open your single player worlds up to multiplayer at any time. Sorry to every Minecraft YouTuber ever. I cannot overstate just how revolutionary this feature would have been. It would easily have been the best feature added in any drop, not just this one. It would be the most used feature by far, and I was extremely excited to be able to finally show off my worlds to my friends without having to go through a realm. So why is this feature not number one? No, well that's simple, Mojang disabled it. Mojang gets a really bad rep online these days for removing or changing features that players really like. For the most part, I think the criticism is a bit overblown, but they definitely did not do themselves any favors with this drop. It started with the Sulfur Cube, as people came up with some pretty cool creations when it was first added to Bedrock Edition. However, when it was added over to Java, the Sulfur Cube was not able to be used in the same way. That led many people to say that Mojang removed the feature because it was too fun. And then Mojang proceeded to shoot themselves even more in the foot by showing off that flying creation in an official animation. You know, the one that's not possible in Java Edition. So then, after that whole fiasco, they introduced their friends list, which was a feature that everyone was excited to see, which is absurdly rare with Minecraft these days. And then they just removed it. Now granted, I'm playing it up a little bit as it's not being fully removed. Only the peer-to-peer functionality is currently disabled, and it's only temporarily disabled due to many issues with how it worked. Problem is, we don't know how long this is going to be disabled for. We will get it eventually, but that eventually is carrying a lot of weight here. You know what else we're going to be getting eventually? The minecart movement changes introduced in 2024. As far as I'm aware, those have not been talked about in nearly 2 years. Or how about the villager rebalance introduced in 2023, which has had a few features slowly roll out, but is still not fully in the game nearly 3 years later? What about the Java combat tests that started back in 2019 and have basically been abandoned for 6 full years? Even features that did make it to the game like the bundle, that was initially supposed to release in 2021 and was delayed all the way until 2024. So yes, we will get the world sharing multiplayer eventually, but how many years are we gonna have to wait for it? Hopefully they realize it's a priority and just add it into the next drop right away, but unfortunately, Mojang does have a pretty rough track record when it comes to delaying features. As soon as it's added, I'm sure it's gonna take the #1 spot on whatever drop it's a part of. Let's just hope that comes sooner rather than later. Alright, with that whole mess out of the way, let's get into the actual list here. 10, Ocelots, Piglin, and Zombie Horses can now spawn on Peaceful Mode. Another reason this drop is much shorter than the others we've ranked is because it really didn't bring with it a ton of the nothing burger changes that make up a lot of the other lists. We've only got 2 worth mentioning this time, and I'm using the word worth very loosely. For some reason, these 3 mobs were initially unable to spawn in Peaceful Mode. I kinda get the Piglin and Zombie Horse, but what is the Ocelot doing here? Oh, it's the scariest mob ever! I'm sure it was probably just a bug, but it's nice that Peaceful Mode players now have access to one of the most useless mobs in the game. The Piglin, though, is the real highlight here. It won't attack you at all in Peaceful Mode, even if you do things that should aggro it, so they're mainly here for bartering. This makes several drops related to hostile mobs like strings and ender pearls significantly easier to obtain for Peaceful Mode players. Issue is, I don't play Peaceful Mode. What do you take me for, a coward? That makes it kinda hard for me to care about this feature since it will literally never affect me. Also, if you're in Peaceful Mode and want a Zombie Horse, they'll just spawn by themselves at night. He looks so lonely. 9, beds bounce higher. Now, when you land on a bed, instead of bouncing up with 66% of the impact velocity, you'll bounce up with 75%. This is to match the same height beds bounce you in Bedrock Edition. I think parity changes are usually for the best, but I mean, they could have given us a cool one like the colored cauldrons at least. Whatever, I guess. I've never seen anyone use bed bouncing for anything, but maybe this will lead to something cool. At the very least, this change will affect the mode I play in instead of just being Peaceful Mode exclusive. 8, the Bounce Music Disc. And we're finally getting into the actual new additions for this drop. Here we have ourselves another music disc, which I'm always happy to get. Generally, these are a bit weird to rank since they're mostly just for listening, so I try to place them on the list based on how much I like listening to the song. Seeing as this is the lowest new addition of the drop, I think this song is just kind of okay. I'm thinking I want to do a music disc ranking in the future, so I'll put off putting it in my tier list for now, but I think this is one of the weaker new discs. I think most people agree with that since I've seen a lot less hype around it compared to bangers like Creator or Pigstep. That said, I do still think it's a pretty solid vibe. Most comments on uploads for the disc call it lo-fi, and I can definitely see that. It's more chill and low-key than a lot of recent discs, so I can certainly see myself listening to this while studying or something. Oh wait, I forgot I graduated. I do think this song is on the more forgettable end compared to most of the new stuff, but maybe I just need to listen to it a bit more. It's certainly not bad, just not one of my favorites. Honestly, the highlight of the disc is how you have to obtain it. The only way to find it is in a Mineshaft's minecart chest, but only if that chest is in a Sulfur Cave biome. I think that's a pretty cool way to encourage exploration of the new biome, but this can definitely lead to some trouble. What if you find a mineshaft that's close to a Sulfur Cave but doesn't quite intersect it? Despite how it may seem, not all hope is lost for getting the disc. Chests in Minecraft structures will only generate their loot when a player opens it for the first time. That's why in spectator mode, you can't open chests that players haven't found yet. Most of the time, this doesn't really affect gameplay at all. However, we can actually use that feature to our advantage here. Chests in mineshafts are special since they're in minecarts, and minecarts are of course able to move. So if you have a mineshaft that's close to but not in a sulfur cave, you can make a rail line to push all the minecart chests into the biome. As long as you or anyone else never open the chest before reaching the biome that will trick the minecart chest into thinking it generated in a sulfur cave, thus allowing you to potentially get the bounce record disc. I think this is a really fun use of this obscure game mechanic, and if it comes down to it, I'd be happy to try this to get the disc for myself, only to discover my friend already looted the chest. The bounce record disc is luckily pretty common too, spawning in over 40% of minecart chests in sulfur caves. So even if you don't get it the first time, you'll probably get it after a couple more tries. 7. The sulfur spike. Now we're getting into the main highlights of the drop, and I think the sulfur spike is probably the weakest new block added here. The pointed design is certainly a pretty unique shape, but I think it'll be harder to build with than some of the other blocks we got. It can be placed on both the floor and ceiling of blocks, with the spike getting a bigger design the more spikes you place on it. If you join a floor and ceiling spike together, they'll also connect to form a new shape. Of course, this isn't the only pointed block in the game, as we also have pointed dripstone. It has basically all the same properties we've listed so far, it's just not yellow. That said, there are some pretty important mechanical differences. Pointed dripstone is probably most used as a spike for players and mobs to fall onto, as doing so will significantly increase the fall damage taken. For whatever reason though, sulfur spikes don't do that, you'll just take the normal amount of fall damage instead. That means falling on yellow spikes in real life is perfectly safe. Pointed dripstone can also deal a large amount of damage by dropping onto a mob's head. You'd think that the sulfur spike would have removed this damage too, but yeah, this is unchanged. So sulfur spikes are essentially pointed dripstone, but without the fall damage. I'm not sure if that could be useful for something, but I guess more mechanical diversity is nice, even if I think it just makes the sulfur spike a worse dripstone. In my mind, the main reason you'll want a sulfur spike is because it allows you to farm and craft most of the sulfur blocks. If a spike is placed on the underside of a sulfur block, it'll slowly grow, which you can harvest to craft into all of the sulfur blocks added in this update. I'm always happy to get a renewable source of an item to make big farms with, even if the sulfur caves do generate with an abundance of sulfur blocks. Also, if you want to farm them in a much slower way, wandering traders will also now be able to trade sulfur spikes to the player. That's pretty useless for normal worlds, but it's great for making these blocks accessible in Skyblock and Superflat. 6. Sulfur springs. For the updates that add biomes or structures, I always have a difficult time figuring out how to place them since they're generally the source of a lot of the new blocks and items. So I'm sort of judging them based on how well I think Mojang did, and if I'd rather be exploring them or just using the items they give. For the case of the sulfur springs and caves, I think I generally prefer just building with the stuff I get from them. Still though, I think Mojang did a great job with the biome, and that starts with the sulfur springs. These will generate on the surface of the world and will basically be a little pond surrounded by sulfur blocks. First off, looks wise, I like these quite a bit. They're generally not too big, but add some nice extra detail to the world. I especially like that they can spawn with geysers as well, so you may be walking in the woods and suddenly see a large burst of water in the distance. Of course, outside of just looks, these are good sources for sulfur, cinnabar, and tough blocks that don't require the player to go underground. That's pretty nice to have, since you never know what's lurking down there. For those that do want to go underground though, these serve an even more important function as they will always generate above sulfur caves. This is much like the azalea trees that spawn on top of lush caves, which I appreciate quite a bit to help make finding these biomes a bit less tedious. Speaking of the cave, 5. The sulfur caves. Of course, this is the main source of basically everything added in this update. Down here, you'll find a ton of sulfur and cinnabar blocks to build with. The red and yellow color scheme give this place a totally unique feel from all the other cave biomes we've gotten so far. Anytime we get a new biome, I think it helps make the world feel so much more fun to explore, and this is absolutely no exception. On top of the exclusive blocks here, I really like the green added to the water and fog of the biome. It makes the atmosphere feel both more unique and more toxic. This is extra cool when you manage to find one of the extremely rare surface sulfur caves. These aren't sulfur springs that always spawn on the surface, but rather a cave itself that happen to spawn a bit high up. If you manage to find one of these in your world, definitely make sure to cherish it as they're very rare, but also extremely cool. Really the only issue that I have with this biome, which is shared with a lot of others, is the fact that there aren't any ore variants for sulfur or cinnabar blocks. You can still find ores in this biome, you just have to get lucky with a patch of stone or deep slate spawning. I haven't tested this, but it wouldn't surprise me if ores are rarer in this biome compared to normal caves, which could discourage people from exploring. Other than that, I think they did a great job here, and I look forward to mining here in the future. Oh yeah, and how can I forget, the new mob of this update, the Sulfur Cube, also exclusively spawns here. Speaking of, for the Sulfur Cube. This little guy is the main highlight of the drop, and it's a very interesting feature. The best way I can describe it is as a physics block. As a mob, it really doesn't do anything. It spawns in sulfur caves, and if killed, it'll split into 2 baby sulfur cubes. Killing those won't drop anything, so you'll want to keep the sulfur cubes alive in order to use them. Now, its usage is pretty complicated, so try your best to bear with me here. In order to use them, you'll want to feed the Sulfur Cube a block. By either clicking the Sulfur Cube with a compatible block or dropping it in front of them, the Sulfur Cube will then absorb that item. When you pick up the Sulfur Cube with a bucket, it'll also maintain the item it ate when you place it back down. Once it eats a block, it will now become completely invincible to melee attacks, except for the knockback. How the Sulfur Cube flies will be affected by where the player hits, if the player is moving, and if they're using the knockback enchantment. Based on the block the Sulfur Cube eats, the physics will also completely change. This can be how it reacts to getting hit, how much it bounces or slides, if it floats and sinks in water, and much more. I think it'll be useful to just rapid fire through all of the different sulfur effects to see if any of them catch your attention. Luckily, the wiki provides a list of blocks that cause each effect, so I'll have that chart on screen for each type. The bouncy type will make the Sulfur Cube float in water, and shockingly be very bouncy. Fast flats will bounce less and slide more often. Fast sliding won't bounce, but will also slide quite a bit. Slow sliding will also not bounce, but their slide will be much slower. High resistance cubes are very hard to push and are not able to bounce. The light type will have lower gravity than the other cubes, making the cube pretty floaty in the air and in the water. Slow flats on the other hand have higher gravity, making them very heavy. Sticky cubes are unable to bounce or slide. Also, only the honeycomb block gives it this property. Hope it's not too lonely. The slow bouncy type makes the cube both slow and bouncy. Finally, we have the regular cubes, which are pretty average across the board and can float in water. Outside of the special physics, 2 other blocks also give the Sulfur Cube some unique properties. TNT can be ignited by either a redstone output or fire and will explode, killing the Sulfur Cube in the process. It's also worth noting that the fuse on this TNT is a little longer than regular TNT. The other special block is the magma block, which will damage other mobs when they come in contact with the cube. So with all those physics listed out, how are we supposed to use the Sulfur Cube? Okay, well the obvious thing would be for custom minigames. Stuff like soccer or volleyball is now super easy to create since the Sulfur Cube can act as a ball. Other than that though, I'm struggling to think of how I would use it personally. It's a very fun mob to just goof around with, especially with the Knockback 2 sword, but I can't really call that useful. To me, this seems like the type of feature that I have to wait and see what the technical community comes up with. There have been a few fun creations like a monorail system, though that could still be done before with just some minecart stuff. The flying boat idea was also pretty cool, but that one was murdered, so I can't really count it either. A physics object, I imagine, is a huge feature to add for technical players, so I don't doubt that we'll see some incredible contraptions using this guy in the future. Unfortunately, I just don't know what those are right now, so I'm not comfortable placing the Sulfur Cube above some of the other additions in this drop that I for sure know what to do with. As of now, it just seems like a fun minigame enhancement, which is great to have, but I'm not much of a minigame developer myself. Wait a minute.
Camel drop hard mode.
I can't even do easy mode, what was I thinking? 3, most of the sulfur blocks. Alright, back to the more standard features, we got a pretty big family of blocks. Well, I say this is standard, but these are actually some of our first full blocks since the Garden Awakens drop from over a year ago. Yes, we have gotten a few placeable things since then, but none that took up a full block until now. You can get the standard sulfur block from either the sulfur caves or by crafting it using the sulfur spike. From there, you can get all the sulfur block variants by using a stone cutter. One thing I really appreciate is just how many variants Mojang has been giving to the recent stone blocks. Both Deep Slate and Tough got a ton, and now we can add sulfur and the other new block set to that list as well. There are pretty much 3 categories of sulfur blocks you can make. First is the standard stone variants, then the polished variants, and finally the brick variants. All 3 can be made into walls, slabs, and stairs, which can help give a lot of variety to any build you want to make with them. There's also the chiseled block that didn't really fit into any of those categories. It's got a cute little Sulfur Cube face. Now all of these blocks are just for building, but seeing as building is the main appeal for Minecraft, I find that to be a pretty good use. Yellow is not really a color I personally build with much, which is why this is lower than our other block set, but getting more blocks in this color could encourage me to do so in the future. It's a lighter tint of yellow than many of the other yellow blocks we've seen before, and having brick and polished textures for any color is always a plus. As a test for this block, my brother suggested I make the back rooms. Backrooms aren't normally made out of stone material, but hey, the color does fit pretty well. I could see this block set coming in handy in quite a few builds, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what talented builders do with it in the future. 2. The cinnabar blocks. Here we have our second set of decorative building blocks, and I think these are even better than the sulfur set. Cinnabar is once again found in sulfur caves, though unfortunately as of now there's no way to obtain it renewably. The caves spawn with plenty of it though, so that's really only a concern for skyblock and superflat players. The red color of the block set, in my opinion, makes it a lot easier to work with. It also has the same block categories as sulfur, with normal stone, bricks, and polished variants. I kinda like how the polished wall resembles the bedrock exclusive border block that I talked about a couple months ago. Happy we finally have a bunch of red walls to build with in Java. For the chiseled block, instead of having a sulfur cube, it now has a spider to go with the fact that cave spiders can naturally spawn in sulfur caves. Whoopsie, forgot to mention that earlier, sorry. While I think the texture looks nice, it does kinda highlight a big nitpick I have with these chiseled blocks, the fact that you can't rotate them. I thought it may have been cool to have a bunch of these chiseled blocks lining the floor so it looks like the spiders are facing towards the player, but unfortunately, no matter what, they're always gonna face to the right. This is a very annoying limitation and can sometimes ruin entire builds if the player built it facing the wrong way. Really hope they give us the ability to rotate these blocks in the future. Anyway, as an example build, I decided to go with the towers that can be found across the Mushroom Kingdom in Super Mario Odyssey. The body of the tower isn't my best work, but I really like how the roof turned out. Color-wise, the cinnabar blocks are much closer than the standard Minecraft bricks, so I'm happy to have a more vibrant red color now. The polished blocks also work quite well as flooring, so I'm definitely looking forward to using this block set more in the future. 1. Potent Sulfur and the Geysers. Of all the new features in this drop, I think Potent Sulfur gets to take the crown as the most interesting. To get this, you'll need to either find it in sulfur caves or craft it using 9 sulfur blocks. On the surface, it may not seem very special beside being a slightly more yellow sulfur block. That is, until you bring the potent sulfur into water. This can have numerous different effects depending on your setup. Simply placing the potent sulfur into water will make it so anyone that goes in the water will be affected by nausea. Considering it's just a visual effect that's not super useful, but if you ever wanted to make a donkey sick, your dreams can come true now. You sick person. The real reason potent sulfur is taking the #1 spot though comes down to what happens when you put it on top of a magma block. If you place a magma block underneath a submerged block of potent sulfur, then every so often, geysers will randomly shoot out from the water. The height and timing of the geysers can even be customized based on how deep the potent sulfur is in the water. If it's just 1 block below the surface, then the geyser will only be 5 blocks tall, but if the potent sulfur is 4 blocks below the surface, the geyser will be 20 blocks tall. The taller the geyser, the longer the eruptions last for. This extra bit of customization makes the geysers very helpful for making all sorts of water-based builds. All of those ideas are really fun, but what if you wanted to keep the geyser going instead of it being random? Well, luckily, if you replace the magma block with lava, the geyser will now be constantly active until the lava source is taken away. That makes this feature so much more useful as we now have full control over when the geysers are dispensed. That is especially helpful because of how entities interact with the geyser. If a player or mob walks into one, they'll be shot up extremely quickly. This is not only fun to mess around with, but can also be extremely helpful for making elevators. Now, instead of having to make giant bubble columns that don't always fit in with a build, all you have to do is place a geyser below the floor, connect the lava dispenser up to a button like this, and boom, you have a super simple and effective elevator. This is especially nice since geysers and players are both able to go through scaffolding. If you don't care about the mechanical side and just want the visual effect, you can also hide geysers by placing a 1-block air gap between the water surface and the block. So I think it's safe to say that the geysers are by far the most interesting and fun part of this update. They're great for both building and creating some pretty fun contraptions. So I think Potent Sulfur and the geysers easily deserve the crown as the best features in the 26.2 drop. But anyways, that's it for this video. Are you obsessed with sulfur cubes that have a block of amethyst inside it and hate me for not putting them at #1? Let me know in the comments. Despite having less entries for our list today, I think a lot of them had quite a bit to talk about, so hopefully this video was still pretty enjoyable. Overall, I'd say this turned out to be probably my second favorite drop just behind the Copper Age. I always love getting new biomes and building blocks. But before I go, I've got to thank my members being Harvey Corbett, Mr. G, Hyatt Shanalfi 5997, RKJD3930, Patrick Gast, Expired Crazy Person, Maidzo2, JJW Gamerboy, The Shin Smash, Nuclear, Doodle Dog 222, Aaron0729, The Cool Man, Lapox14, Megalamari, Danny Gaming Central, Lucy V Uwu, The Silent 123, Windows Vista's fan-made content, Genie VV Yoso, Wyatt Derpy, Leonard Von Hevering, Starfly, Disco Fama, Cassie Channel, Drop D Mike 75, Virtual Tomato, Daniel Castillo 1262, Anton 3669, Smuggy, Guy 112, Young Smoky VP7, Zach Pro, Flame 765, Peanut Brown of Gallery, Gorpasaurus, BFDI Macaron, Stephen Hafner, Night Vision 101, PDX, Wilbur, Mogo Mogo Boat, Stuffy Ant, Rich229, Jehojib, Magnus and Larslot, Trifector, Tibby, Hippopotamus, Levi Strux, Blessed Tiger, Yanni the Duck, Trader Mo, Mevins 2001, Display Changer, B Major 2003, Sir Musty, Belandor, Cinder CC, Jade Avery, Thicky Reiki, Ungenio TM, Tesseract, JubeTube, Jameson Pageson, Z Frost Keep, and Christian Flattery Sequel Edition. But anyways, drive loans for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.